Coming up, assuming we can finance the budget that the president is selling, will it include a limit on your mortgage deduction? Every side of this one teed up next. President Obama on the Hill today trying to line up support for his budget, as you heard John Harwood reporting. The budget carries with it a record $1.7 trillion deficit. Now that Congress is over that initial sticker shock, the horse trading has begun. How much of the controversial agenda, including cuts and deductions for charitable giving and mortgage payments, will actually go through? Joining us in an all-star lineup, Josh Bivens with the Economic Policy Institute, Dan Mitchell, Cato Institute Senior Fellow and author of The Global Tax Revolution, and Dolly Lenz, Vice Chairman at Prudential Douglas Elliman. Thanks to all three of you for being with us. Dolly, let's start with you. This mortgage deduction, can you just explain who's going to get hit by it?
Well, anyone earning over $250,000 a year, they're capping basically your deductions, you know, from 33 to 35% down to 28%. And mostly it'll affect high-level states such as California and New York. So unless the thing is indexed, I think it's going to be a problem. What would you say, Dan? Do we need to index it? Would that be a compromise?
Well, I'm sort of stuck in the middle on this issue because I've always liked the flat tax, which would get rid of itemized deductions. But I certainly don't want to get rid of itemized deductions if it just means more money for the government. So I think homeowners are going to face a double whammy. Tax rates are going to go up, and they're going to lose some of their itemized deductions, and that just can't be good news, especially, as was just said, for people in high-tax, high-property states like New York and California.
All right, Josh, make the case for why this makes sense to you.
Well, the mortgage interest deduction is expensive. It costs about $93 billion a year in money foregone, and it's one of the most regressive parts of the tax code. I mean, as your other guest just mentioned, I mean, it's a small slice of people who are going to be affected by this, about the top 1.2%, and we're not eliminating it for them entirely. It's just going to cut it from 39 to 28. Given that we need revenue right now and in the future, I think I want to raise it in a pretty progressive way, and this fits that bill.
Josh, you make the case, but can you answer the broader question, which even the president has said, is you don't use tax policy really for social engineering, and you certainly can't tax your way to prosperity.
Well, you can tax your way to prosperity if you spend it intelligently, and these revenues are earmarked for a fundamental reform of our healthcare system, which is actually the biggest budget-busting item in the future. So I think you can't look at any specific part of anybody's budget and make a global statement about how well the economy is going to do. I think the entire package of the Obama budget is actually growth-enhancing and pretty progressive.
Dolly, in terms of people's behavior, obviously this hasn't passed yet, and there's question marks about it, but you obviously on the real estate side are dealing with people who have mortgages or who are buying homes. Is this going to affect their behavior?
You know, I think the biggest problem is, A, it will affect their behavior because it's going to bring down their confidence about a value of the home in the future. Because if you start with this deduction being repealed or brought back, then maybe the deduction goes out the window altogether. So people are really looking at, well, what is the next step, you know, the next shoe to drop? So it definitely impacts confidence, which impacts everything.
Let's move to the charitable deduction issue. Martin Feldstein wrote an op-ed today in the Washington Post, Dan, which was interesting. He basically walked through it and said the bottom line will be this: wealthier people won't give as much, so this is essentially just a tax increase for charities in this country. What do you think?
Well, there's no question that if you get rid of or limit an itemized deduction at the same time that you're having overall tax rates increase, that's going to have a negative effect. And I'm saying this as someone who ultimately would like to get rid of these deductions. But the president is getting rid of them in the most destructive way possible. And, you know, in some sense, I have to agree with Josh. This is fundamentally an issue about whether we think the economy will be better if we increase the burden of taxes and spending. And I look at countries like France and I say, why would we want to copy countries that are economically stagnant because government is too much of a burden on the productive sector?
Although France has a lot lower corporate tax rate than we have now, which is an irony here in all of this. Josh, are these, either one of these issues are certainly hot-button issues around the country? They aren't, I mean, I understand that you're laying out that it's $93 billion just for the mortgage deduction, but when you look at the broad budget, these aren't the huge numbers in there. Do you think he would give in on these, which wouldn't be a whole lot for him to give in on? He'd get most of what he wanted. Are these the issues we'll see him cave on?
You know, that I'm not sure about. My guess is he's going to hold pretty firm on them because they are earmarked specifically for something that he does seem to have very high on his priority list, which is they pay for a good part of the money he's setting aside to do fundamental health care reform. And so my guess is his response to people who want to carve these out will be, that's fine, but we need roughly $640 billion over the next 10 years to do fundamental health reform. You tell me where the revenue should come from. And unless people come up with alternative sources, my guess is he's going to fight pretty hard on these.
And Dolly, a final word to you on housing in terms of what you are seeing. Obviously, you're dealing with an area around New York where there is quite a bit of uncertainty and obviously the epicenter of the financial storm. But are you seeing a bottom?
You know, all the good indicators that came out over the last week I think are great, but you know, 1 month does not a trend make. So while we're not seeing a bottom, and certainly not yet in New York, at least it's all good signs. And that's what we'd like to keep up, is good signs, keep everybody confident. And I think the housing market could bring the whole economy out of its problem. So that's why I think it's key not to do this.
Josh, Dan, Dolly, thank you, all three of you, for taking the time. Serious issues and for getting on a few of those specific hot button ones that we know have caused a lot of questions.